What's up, guys? This is going to be a shorter one, so let's jump right in. So, over the last 3 weeks, we've been looking at how the presidents become more powerful, overall look at policy decisions from presidents, and main decision points to reference later. Today, we're going to go over the different chains of command. So, president, of course, head of state, head of government. There's the Department of State, Department of War and Defense, or Department of War or Defense. Intelligence community, and interagency communication. So aside from being head of state and head of government, the president has a few roles. Commander-in-chief, leader of the cabinet, and has the ability to do executive orders. The president being commander-in-chief goes all the way back to Washington, of course. He was commander-in-chief of the colonial army before the United States was even official, and that's what the Second Continental Congress established. Other presidents with military experience, some of the major ones being Grant, who won the Civil War for the North, became president, and then prosecuted the KKK. You had Teddy Roosevelt, who was, I believe, Assistant Secretary of the Navy. And then the Spanish-American War broke out. He resigned from his post, became a colonel, and recruited what were called the Rough Riders. And no, it has nothing to do with DMX, which is a joke I'm not sure anyone will get. But anyway, Rough Riders were from all over the place. So it's like cowboys, free, like Southern sharecroppers, sons of slaves, just almost like a Avengers level recruitment campaign to get all these really good, high quality soldiers. And you have Eisenhower, who's credited with winning World War II. A lot of people give him credit for it. So sort of like Grant, he rode the popularity into the presidency. And then on the right, you have George Bush and then George W. Bush, who were both pilots. George Bush was, I believe, almost executed in a POW camp, but he was able to escape. Now, we've already talked about the cabinet at length, so there's not much point in going over it again. Best I could find, this is the current cabinet under President Trump. And the other thing that we haven't had time to touch on yet is executive orders, or this declaration that a president can do. So what are executive orders? According to Article 2 of the Constitution, the president has something called executive power. So statutory power formalized in the Youngstown Sheet and Tube Company versus Sawyer. So president is acting like this. Supreme Court puts limits and sort of defines what executive orders are. I believe this was under Truman. What EOs cannot do are create new laws, override the Constitution, appropriate funds, and override extant laws. So what does this mean? Well, the president can essentially, within these limits, declare stuff. So you have like the Emancipation Proclamation, probably one of the more famous ones. It doesn't technically count as an executive order, but it's really splitting hairs. Of course, the one of the ones that's not memorized or remembered well is the executive order putting Japanese Americans in internment camps after Pearl Harbor. And one that's more recent, it was called the Muslim ban or the travel ban, depending on who you're talking to. But it limited travel from mainly Muslim majority countries. Of course, you have the Secretary of State, who's the chief diplomat, number one diplomat. We talked about this. Current Secretary of State is Marco Rubio. and Secretary of State leads the Department of State. So what does the Department of State do? The Department of State does a lot, and it's mainly a way for a mechanism for diplomacy, and that can be either just direct talks or through more indirect methods like financial investment, aid, and stuff like that. Generally, we talked about this too. Secretary of State is either an up and comer, so especially if it's someone who doesn't have a lot of foreign policy experience and they want to run in president in a few years, very common thing to do is make them Secretary of State. But we also talked about how Barack Obama made Hillary Clinton Secretary of State after their rough primary, not only to help her get foreign policy experience for the 2016 election, but also to, like we talked about, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. And we see a similar relationship between Trump and Rubio. So ambassadors are beneath undersecretaries of the state and, of course, undersecretary of state, and they're sent to another country to improve or maintain relations. And they have something called diplomatic immunity, more legal protections to avoid their abuse in more hostile states. So in some countries, or in most cases, diplomatic immunity doesn't really matter that much. If you're ambassador to, let's say, France, you're probably not going to go around and like mess with French laws because you want to maintain good relations. Where diplomatic community comes in, though, is more hostile or rival states. So a great example being like ambassadors to the Soviet Union would rely on diplomatic immunity, not because they plan on breaking the law, but because they're probably going to get accused of breaking the law, and it serves as a protection against that. Why are they going to get accused of breaking the law? So the police can mess with them and harass them. Generally, ambassadors come from some mix of three camps or three sort of backgrounds. The professional class, or highly experienced people who've been working in the department or State Department for a long time. Then there are donors, being the second camp, so more rich people sent to who donate a lot of money and then are given an ambassadorship. And then the third is political favors for political allies. So this is Ambassador Chris Stevens. He was ambassador to Libya in 2012, and he definitely comes from the first camp. Highly experienced, big background in the State Department. In 2012, there was a attack at his compound in Benghazi, and it was severely underprotected. What ended up happening is they had a safe room, but without a ventilation system. So these rioting Libyans came in, tore up the compound. Ambassador Stevens and a few other people went into the safe room and died of smoke inhalation. And this was a big scandal called the Benghazi scandal. I believe Michael Bay made a movie off it. It's not very good. The other two camps of where ambassadors come from are, like we talked about, donors or like longtime supporters of the president. And then another one is for political allies, less so financial. So on the left, that's Tom Barak. He's the current ambassador to Turkey. He really big name in the real estate field. He'd been working with Trump in Manhattan real estate for decades. Fun fact, was also recently named in the Epstein files. Some very creepy messages I don't recommend looking up. And then on the right is Herschel Walker. I thought it would be funny to put in his MMA outfit. But he was also a pro football player. He ran for Congress in, I believe, 2022. Um, during the midterms where Republicans severely underperformed, he did not win. But he's been a consistent Trump ally for a long time. So he was given ambassadorship to the Bahamas. And so you can kind of tell where someone's going to go based on their background. Um, uh, Someone who has a lot of foreign policy experience, like Stevens, is going to be sent to a more sensitive country like Libya. Brock, with more business experience, donor, going to be sent to a big country like Turkey. That's super important. Not to say that Libya or the Bahamas aren't important, but Turkey's a NATO ally and uh, super important for security. And then Walker basically given a very cool job in exchange for loyalty. He lives in the Bahamas as an ambassador now, so yeah, if he doesn't want that job, I'll take it. Now, beneath ambassadors are foreign service officers, because an ambassador can't do everything. These are representatives of the U.S. government on foreign soil. And they go into one of five categories. There's consulars, so visas and citizens. Um, when my wife got her visa to come to America, she had to visit a consular office. Economic and trade, so economic development, management, just sort of a catch-all for operations, political analysis, reports back to the State Department as to what the on-the-ground politics are like, and then public diplomacy or some sort of outreach, going to different places, experiencing the culture, sharing American culture and stuff like that. So moving on from the Department of State, let's go to the Department of War, formerly Department of Defense, and I might slip up and accidentally call it that. So I apologize if I do. At the top level, there are several different, almost always generals, that lead different parts of the Department of War. So the first category would be the Combat Command, or you can see on the left here, Northcom, Southcom, Africom, US UCOM, CENTCOM, and INDOPACOM. Basically, parts of the globe that are carved up, and generals are put in charge of all the US forces in these fields. So every one of those generals has sort of the same level in the esteem of the Department of War. And then at the same level, you have the 6 departments, or like military departments. So Army, Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, National Guard Bureau, and Space Force. Sometimes the Coast Guard is included. We talked about the exception. And then finally, there's sort of an advisory role. It's the Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff. Currently, that's General Kane. Traditionally, the Secretary of Defense is a veteran also. Of course, current Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, has a bit of a unique background because he was enlisted before he was an officer, which is normally not how the Secretary of War, Secretary of Defense is chosen. They almost always come from sort of an officer class. So when Pete Hegseth was announced to be nominated for this, a lot of enlisted men and women were very happy about it because someone with an enlisted background is seen to be more of a man of the people. Of course, between these two roles, he was on Fox News a lot. Now, the Department of War oversees spending for the world's largest military by several orders of magnitude. So it is super, super, super important. Now, keep in mind the president is commander-in-chief, but can't do funding for this. So when there's a crisis, they'll ask for more funding from Congress, then Congress will approve it or not. And we talked about war authorization powers and stuff like that. Uh, then we also have the intelligence community. Um, so CIA for external intelligence, FBI for internal intelligence. So the CIA is not allowed to operate on U.S. soil. FBI is not supposed to operate off of U.S. soil. That's the big difference between the two. Then there's the NSA, which is more monitoring, and this is all coordinated by the Director of National Intelligence, or DNI, who is currently Tulsi Gabbard. So early internet days. Interesting story about the intelligence community. Early internet days, there's this up-and-coming young hacker named Mindax. Most people don't know his real name at this point, but the guy is going around causing absolute chaos. He's hacked into the Pentagon. He's stolen hundreds of thousands from Citibank. He's just going on a tear, basically. Eventually, he's revealed to be an Australian man named Julian Assange. And in 2010, he has this website called WikiLeaks. And what it's designed to do is exactly what you think. Whistleblowers can go there to leak sensitive data. So of course, government can't stand the guy. Most governments can't, but he has this sort of self-imposed set of ethics, um, where he doesn't think government should have secrets. And so, 2010, a very controversial video was uploaded. Now, I'm not going to play the video for obvious reasons. Like with so much other stuff in this class, you can look it up yourself if you have the inclination. But it's called Collateral Murder. It's a very tough video to watch. But what it is it's footage of an attack helicopter shooting journalists in the Middle East, while the pilots are laughing about it. And so this comes out, and a lot of the government is not really upset about the video as much as the video being released. So Mindak, or Julian Assange, is currently still living in the Ecuadorian embassy to avoid arrest. But the person who leaked the video at the time was known as Bradley Manning. And so intelligence and the army leaks the video and isn't able to escape the law. So Manning is sent to jail in, I believe, 2011, 2012. While in jail, Manning reveals her gender identity to be female. That's around 2013. And then 2017, as Obama is leaving office, he pardons Manning. And now Chelsea Manning is a transparency activist and advocate. Now, a few years later, you have Edward Snowden, who, more than the collateral murder video, revealed that the NSA especially had been spying on basically everybody for years, which a lot of people felt was a breach of the Fourth Amendment. Unfortunately, the courts have found to be that it is not a breach of the Fourth Amendment. We talked about the secret courts before. We're going to go more into Smith versus Maryland. This is Glenn Greenwald. He's the journalist who broke the story. Like how Assange is in the Ecuadorian embassy, there was a big, well, this was a very big controversy at the time. Many people thought, well, by leaking all this stuff, Snowden has endangered secret agents and stuff like that. And other people, like at this protest, thought it was worth it to stop mass spying, or at least make people aware that they're being monitored on such a large scale by the government. And so for opinion polling, it doesn't really get better than Pew. As you can see here, slightly over half of people thought that Snowden had harmed the public interest. As time goes on, I would imagine that's probably gone down. I haven't seen any recent polls about Snowden though. And like I said, with Julian Assange living in the Ecuadorian embassy, Snowden lives in a Russian embassy, has a Russian passport, and all that now to avoid arrest. Both Snowden and Julian Assange have taken to living in embassies very differently. Julian Assange has gained a bunch of weight, looks older than he is, and has described being stuck in the embassy for that long as psychological torture. Snowden has had a very different experience. He's been able to start a family, get a movie based on him, an Oliver Stone movie, and was even featured on the Joe Rogan Experience. So, what gives the government justification for mass spying? We have Fourth Amendment rights that protect us from unreasonable search and seizure. So, a lot of people from the get-go will say, hey, the government doesn't need to know what library books I've checked out or what I've ordered on Amazon or, what Marvel fan club I'm on Facebook. This is unreasonable search and seizure. Well, for that we get to think this creep, Michael Lee Smith. 1979 is when this is determined. So leading up to that, he keeps harassing this woman. So calling her, hanging up, and she knows who it is, but can't prove it. And the police want him to stop also. So they pull phone records from the phone company and are able to prove that it's him doing it and harassing. What Smith argued was that this was unreasonable search and seizure. What the police said, and how the Supreme Court ended up agreeing with the police, was that search and seizure applies to your stuff, but they can search the phone company, and when you call out of your house, you don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy. So that's 1979 this is determined and upheld. What ends up happening more is that as the internet goes on, it's determined that stuff going from your computer is you don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy when you're connected to the internet. So that's how the Supreme Court was able to get around it. And that's how the NSA, CIA, FBI all justify the surveillance state. So that Supreme Court case was called Smith versus Maryland. I'd remember that for the test. And now, state by state, there's different warrants for cell phone tracking and requirements. Incidentally, some life advice. Know if you're a one or an all-party consent state. Tennessee is a one-party consent state. My home state, South Carolina, is too. Oh, this saved me thousands of dollars a few years ago. I was leaving a lease on an apartment. They tried to bury me under thousands of dollars of basically bullshit. But because it's a one-party consent state, I was able to get them, record them basically saying that what they were doing was wrong, and then I confronted them with it and ended up having them drop all the fees. So, yeah, just little, while we're talking about the Fourth Amendment, that's good to know. Moving on from the intelligence community, we've also got Congress. So the main sort of breaches Congress has in foreign policy are the Foreign Affairs Committee, United States Foreign Relations Committee, Committee of House Armed Services, and then House Committee for Appropriations. So what these do is just oversee different types of foreign policy. So they'll vote relevant bills out of committee to the general floor to eventually become law. But what they also do is hearings. When you go to a congressional hearing, of course, you're taking an oath. You are on the hook for perjury if you lie, or you're supposed to be at least. And so what happens is whenever there's a big scandal, a lot of the time we'll see something with the committees come out, and it's really a way to get people on record to talk about very controversial stuff. This is the Iran-Contra committee. There's also the September 11th attacks committee right there. Donald Rumsfeld. He was actually Secretary of Defense twice. Once in the 1970s, if you can believe it, under Ford. And then he served again as Secretary of Defense under W. Bush. So this is them finding out about all the stuff around the September 11th attacks. Sort of a fun fact about Rumsfeld, he's sort of forgotten about nowadays. He died in 2021, and you don't really hear his name talked about much anymore. But he was such a big name during the Bush administration that the TV satire The Boondocks actually based two characters, Edward Wuncler III, or W for W. Bush, and then next to him with the bandana is nicknamed Gin Rummy, or based off Donald Rumsfeld. And then there's the Benghazi Committee. So the attack was in 2012, but they didn't actually have the committee on it until 2016. This is leading up to the 2016 election, so it did a lot to damage Hillary Clinton's chances in that. Back to the Bush years, there's also the Weapons of Mass Destruction Committee. I'm not sure if this was from that or from the UN, or if he pulled out anthrax at both. But famously, Secretary of State Colin Powell claims to have pulled out anthrax in order to talk about weapons of mass destruction. Kind of like Rumsfeld, Colin Powell is more or less forgotten about these days too. He passed away during COVID. And this only is tangentially related to foreign policy, but the big committee going on recently is the Epstein Files Transparency Act Committee. I don't know if y'all have seen the videos of Pam Bondi related to this, but overall that's an idea of what Congress can do, is really bring people up and then grill them about certain events. Tie it back to the intelligence community, one of the big findings after the 9/11 Commission report was that we talked about this before, I know, everyone had sort of a piece of the puzzle. So the FBI knew a little, the CIA knew a little, but none of them were able to really put it together in a way that they could prevent the 9/11 attacks. So part of the reforms was called interagency communication. So it was to set up ways for the different intelligence services to talk to each other. So now, at least the hope is that all the different intelligence services can talk to each other and coordinate. There's different mechanisms for that. The main one is that the Director of National Intelligence will go through all that. So that would be, in this case, Tulsi Gabbard. The other thing the intelligence community is responsible for is the daily briefing for the president. So it's normally in the morning. President goes from his room in the White House to the West Wing or the Oval Office, and then there's just briefing as to what the current situation is. And then the other thing is sort of a fun connection to GTA 5. One of the subplots in the video game has their version of the FBI and CIA competing for funds. One of the other post 9/11 reforms was basically you have to compete for funds, and that's why there's so many alphabet soup agencies: CIA, FBI, DHS, NSA. So there was a real worry for a while that the intelligence services would go on to stage attacks to boost up their funding, essentially. And then it turned out that the FBI actually was doing shady stuff to boost funding. To mid 2000s, this guy is arrested for helping plan or be lookout for a bombing at Herald Square. So arrested for terrorism, sent to prison. And then it came out that the FBI had basically intentionally sent people to radicalize him, and he had mental limitations, we'll say. So he was vulnerable to being picked on. They came to light in 2021, so after he'd been in prison for a very long time. So to review, we went over Department of State, role of ambassadors, foreign service officers, Department of Defense and War, their limitations, Congress, the intel community, and certain scandals around that. And this is all like an official chain of command stuff, right? Department of State and Department of War, both for an intel community, all report to the president. Everyone reports to Congress in some capacity. But this is all formal. So what about unofficial capacity? Well, what's a gray area is the president's role as chief diplomat. Um, Others would say that's more the Secretary of State's job, but the president is literally the president, so their name and presence carries more weight. So presidential visits are a big deal. So there's Donald Trump and Kim Jong Un, Joe Biden and Abe Shinzo. This is the Japanese. He's the Japanese president that was assassinated a few years ago. This was after he was done being president. Um, Barack Obama and Angela Merkel, and then you have W. Bush and Tony Blair from the UK. But where it gets to be even less official or more unofficial, or however you want to phrase it, this is an interesting case because you can probably tell by his stature and hair. This is Barack Obama in Berlin. The thing is this is Senator Barack Obama in Berlin running for president of the United States. At first, it caused a lot of confusion in the States because why is he effectively campaigning in Germany? Germans can't vote in U.S. elections. But what was actually going on was he knew he had difficulty being visualized as the first black president. It had never happened before. So to send him to an event where he's doing something very presidential gave him an edge that ended up helping his campaign a great deal. And you know I had to do it to you. 2008 mentioned. Incidentally, AOC is doing something very similar, or did something very similar last week. I'm going to let you draw your own conclusions as to what her presidential ambitions are because of this.